Now it's a privilege to introduce tonight's speakers. Bonnie Tsui is a longtime contributor to the New York Times. Her best-selling books include Why We Swim and American Chinatown, which won the Asian Pacific American Award for Literature. Her new book, On Muscle, The Stuff That Moves Us and Why It Matters, is a vivid, thought-provoking celebration of musculature that is currently being translated into 6 languages and was named one of NPR's Books We Love of 2025. Joining Tsui in conversation tonight is acclaimed science writer Annie Murphy-Paul. Her books include The Extended Mind, Origins, The Cult of Personality, and she's currently a senior writer at the podcast and radio program Hidden Brain. Now please join me in welcoming Bonnie Tsui and Annie Murphy-Paul.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming. I'm really looking forward to this conversation with Bonnie tonight because I really enjoyed her book on muscle. And Bonnie, one of the things that I loved the most about your book is the way that it weaved together personal narrative and science and history and first-hand on-the-ground reporting. And to that personal narrative piece, there's a figure in your life that you introduced to us really early on in the book who maybe was the first to draw your attention to muscle. And I wonder if you could read a passage from that opening of the book that will introduce us to that
I would
person.
love to. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. So this is from the introduction of the book. Make me a muscle. At 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, I knew to stick my arm out obligingly and contract my biceps. My father, passing through the room on his way somewhere else, would give my upper arm a squeeze and laugh. Very good, he'd say. Then he'd make a muscle back and ask, am I fit or what? It became a family joke. My father, who moved from Hong Kong to New York in the late 1960s, was more an acolyte of Bruce Lee than of Jack LaLanne. But he'd long been an attentive, multidisciplinary student of what I'll call Muscle Academy. Everything from practicing judo, taekwondo, and karate, the latter two in which he earned a brown belt and a black belt, to steeping himself in fitness Americana, bodybuilding competitions on TV, magazines, subscriptions to Muscle and Fitness, sketches of famous athletes. He was a professional artist who, among many other accomplishments, created the posters advertising the 1984 Olympic Games on ABC, and with them, the glorification of the competitors, our modern gods on earth. We always had a makeshift home gym, equipped with a motley collection of free weights, hand grips, and pull-up bars, as well as nunchucks, jump ropes, and heavy punching bags. As far back as memory serves, my brother and I were drafted to join our father in training sessions. A recently unearthed Polaroid shows us, impossibly tiny in diapers, standing alongside our impressively fit father in his swim trunks, all of us proudly grinning and arms akimbo in a superhero pose. It was 1979, the heyday of the movie Superman. All we needed were 3 capes to complete the look. Am I fit or what? Every evening in the garage, the 3 of us moved in formation. Forward kick, side kick, roundhouse kick. Our father would ask us to hold down his legs while he did sit-ups, or Andy and I would dangle from his biceps like a pair of baby monkeys while he lifted and swung us. After dinner, under the yellow sodium glare of the neighborhood streetlights, we'd flank him on nighttime jogs down to the parking lot behind our pediatrician's office, a mile away. We'd chase lightning bugs and our dad. What did we learn as children from all this early training? That nocturnal exercise was normal in our family, though not so normal in others, and that being strong was good for each of us alike.
So Bonnie, could you tell us some more about your dad and how he came to be such a central figure in your book?
Yeah, well, you probably can tell from that story, just that first chapter, that my dad is kind of weird. Like all the things that we did. Can everyone hear me, by the way? Okay, great. I was told to mash this to my mouth, like in karaoke, so I just want to make sure I'm doing it right. I think he was raised he was raised in a time in which, he was born in Hong Kong, and he was like a lifeguard, and he was like skin diving, and he was a martial artist. And exercise was not something, exercise was so important to him, but it was also something that at the time he said his own dad did, but was not normal at that time there. And so he kind of like came to America, and my brother and I were born in New York, and he was like, this is something that I need to instruct you in. This like physical education, not, in a life of physicality, and also of appreciating what it is to be strong in the world. And so that for my brother and me, and I think really especially for me because I was a girl, that we were treated the same. We were like a year and 8 days apart, and we were basically, Irish twins, and just we were sparring from a very young age, and I did not feel that I wasn't capable. Physically, athletically. I mean, we did the same things. We like joined the soccer team, joined the swim team, like did all the things. And that was as important for me as it was for my brother. And my father being an artist, kind of sort of unspooling through the book, is like this aesthetic appreciation for form and function. And I think those two things really went paired together for me.
Bonnie, another thing I really love about your book, I'm going to try to do the karaoke thing, is the way that you use the topic of muscles to explore all these different themes and ideas, including our ideas about masculinity and femininity. And I wonder if you could tell us about Jan Todd, who she is, what she did, and what her experience tells us about gender and sexuality.
Jan Todd is in the opening section of the book on strength, and she's one of my favorite characters and people I spent time with. So she was she is still alive. She was in the 70s. She was the first woman to lift these Scottish stones of strength known as the Dinnie Stones, which weigh 733 pounds. So if any of you follow any strong people sports, you'll see that the Dinnie Stones are like, they're what were called manhood stones in Scottish tradition and across human history. Lifting heavy things in public is kind of it's a providence. It's the providence of men, right? And demonstrating strength. And so in Scotland, as part of the Highland Games, there are all these feats of strength, and one of them, oftentimes it involves the hammer throw and things that you recognize from the Olympics now, because a lot of those sports, actually tug of war was a Highland Games sport that was in the first 3 modern Olympics, and I'm so sad that it's not in the Olympics now, because can you imagine? That's so fun. And I think hammer throw, and I'm trying to remember now, there's another one that was still, maybe it was a shot put. Anyway, you're handling a heavy thing, you're throwing a heavy thing, and lifting heavy things. The Dinnie stone, oftentimes these manhood stones, they were just big, unwieldy boulders that you would go and pick up when you were a boy, and then after you picked them up, you were a man, yay. And you got to sometimes wear a feather in your cap because you had achieved this. And so these particular stones are the most famous in Scotland, and they live outside of this pub. And one of the first men first men in modern history to lift them was the guy, David Prowse, who was the actor who played Darth Vader in the Star Wars movies, because he was 6'8", and he had amazing leverage to get these stones. Jan Todd was not 6'8", she was 5'8" on her tallest day, and she lifted these. She was the first woman to lift them in the 70s, and she would also remain the only woman to lift them for 40 years. So this was before Title IX. So Jan's story, I'm going to back up and say, she is a person who literally did not know her own strength, because she was not given the opportunity to play sports. I mean, she came up in a time in which, she wanted to do ballet when she was 12, and her dad wouldn't let her because he said it would make her legs too muscular. And her grandmother was like, you don't, she was the fastest kid in her school, and her grandmother said, don't run too fast because you don't want the boys to think that you're faster than they are. So this is the environment when she came up in. And so she was always like fast and strong and athletic, but she just she had no opportunity to discover how strong she was. And so she attended Mercer University, which is a school in Macon, Georgia. And she started playing like intramural softball. And so at the end of the season, everyone went to this professor's house named Terry Todd. And Terry Todd was at that time a professor. He was one of the he had founded the African American Studies program at Mercer. He was also a historian of strength sports and just really had immersed himself in all these traditions. And he was also like a former like junior national champion in powerlifting. And so he loved to tell like stories about strength. And so there were all these logs. So everyone's like outside in this farm and there are all these logs. Think about them as like telephone poles that had like fallen in a winter storm. And so they were kind of stacked up. And he started talking about in the Highland Games, there was one event called the caber toss. And so I'm going to try to demonstrate for you while sitting down what a caber toss is. So imagine I've got this telephone pole. I'm holding it right here at my stomach, and I have to run forward with this long telephone pole of a wooden log that then has to flip end over end and fall away from me, like at 12 o'clock. And so it's just this crazy thing where you have to like, it's balance, it's strength, it's also like shoving it up in the air. And so then, as often happens at a party, a lot of men step forward to try to demonstrate something that they had never done before, and then they couldn't do it. And then Jan Todd comes down and picks up the log and then flips it over, and then everyone is just like agog and starts cheering. And then Terry Todd, who was like, he had coached, weightlifting, he knew this tradition of like female strong women from like vaudeville and like circus era, and he was just like, I think that was the day I began to love her. Because she was just like, I see you. I identify you. It was like sword in the stone kind of stuff. But he didn't she didn't start lifting weights after that. It wasn't like they married like a couple of years later, and then they were both professors, and she was getting her degree, her master's degree, and then she started going with him to the gym every once in a while to lift. And then one day they were at this Texas athletic club in Austin, and he's doing his routine, and she's just kind of like lifting a few barbells and some dumbbells, and she was just kind of like, I'm going to correct my round shoulder posture. She wasn't thinking about lifting heavy things. And there was this woman who came in and started deadlifting 225 pounds. And it was like double her weight because she was like this tiny thing. And so she went over to talk to her. And by the end of the afternoon, Jan was deadlifting 225 pounds. So they go home, and Terry has like a whole archive of stuff. And he said, all of these women, there's a whole tradition of strong women. Like you could do that too if you wanted to. And then she found, they were looking at the Guinness Book of World Records. And the record for the heaviest two-handed lift by a woman was like in the 20s by this French woman. And it was like 390 pounds or something like that. And she said, I think I can beat that. So she did. Like a year and a half later, she beat that record. She held like 3 records in powerlifting, world records by the time she was 25. She was in Sports Illustrated as the world's strongest woman. She was on the Johnny Carson show. I mean, it's just like, I encourage you to look all this stuff up because she is just this like young woman lifting all of these. She could lift the she could lift her car, like her Ford Fiesta. Like she would just say like, oh, we would have our car in the driveway, and she would say, every once in a while I would just go down and pick up the side of the Ford Fiesta, not because like I was necessarily demonstrating anything to my friends, but because it felt good. So it was for myself.
Sure. Yeah. Sure. I lift my car for fun too.
Yeah. I'd like to. Psychically, I do.
So that the story of Jan Todd was in a section of the book called Strength, right? And the next section is called Form. And I wonder if you could talk to us, Bonnie, about what you learned when you looked into the history of the ideal body. What roles does muscle play in that?
Well, I was really curious about how muscle came to play such an outsized role and how we think of the ideal body, right? Like this kind of very articulated, like the, Hercules, like all these sculptures especially in Greek medicine and art. And so I kind of read this really wonderful read this really wonderful book that kind of outlined this divergence of Greek, so Eastern and Western medicine, Greek and Chinese medicine, where like at a certain time, it was not very different how we thought of the body and health and beauty, where like muscle was not differentiated from flesh overall. It was kind of like, it wasn't separate as something that you had to like work on. But at a certain point in time in Greek medicine, and then also in the way that philosophers talked about the body, there's a divergence in which even before the Greeks understood what muscles were, they were sculpting the bodies with like these ripples, like everywhere, like even where there weren't actually any muscles, because they understood that these ripples were associated with strength, power, and then also like a discipline, right? So then like a discipline of both body and mind. And, and those are the sort of ideals that we kind of get passed on. Thank you. And then in Chinese medicine, actually, you look back to kind of more contemporary records of health by doctors, and like in acupuncture maps of the body, you'll see a human figure, but it looks more like a yogi with a full belly. Sorry, and so a healthy body looked like it had like a beer gut, but it's not. It's this belly is full of chi, and so like it's like about the energy flow through the body, and so this body was strong and flexible and had a lot of chi. So it's like life energy and life force and breath, and so they were all, exercise was part of that, like strength, like certain exercise practices were part of that, but it wasn't in the interest of like achieving this like chiseled body like a Hercules, and that all kind of trickled down like through the Renaissance and certainly with Michelangelo. But then the interesting thing with Michelangelo is that he sculpted and also painted the bodies. In the Sistine Chapel, like the female figures are as strong as the male, and like the Sibyls were, this beautiful androgyny of these figures, like that are just so physically powerful at rest, and also in action, and oftentimes it was because his models were male models, right? Because like at that time, like it was very unusual in the artist studio that you would find a female model, like that it was not proper to do that. So very, very few circumstances allowed for that. And so he would make his sketches, and you would see that they were male models, and then he would transfer them to the ceiling in the finished paintings of these just beautiful glowing figures of, again, the Sibyls and the figures of Christianity. And his, like when he did the Sistine Chapel, and then it was like the Last Judgment, like the figure of like Christ being this really muscular, like it was kind of like shockingly human. I think all of the figures felt like shockingly human, and even at that time, people talked about it. And at the same time, it attracted the crowds to the church, because it was like this was considered the religious education, like these paintings. And so the church actually wanted Michelangelo to make these like kind of sometimes like a little sensational figures, because it was like, this is how you get people to come to church and kind of learn about religion. And it was really interesting also, I remember when I was a kid, when I was 12, that was when the Sistine Chapel restoration was completed for the Last Judgment. And it was like, my dad, like he had some art magazines in which he was like talking to us about, and he said, look at these figures, look at the muscles, like on all, and he was pointing out to me like the women looked like as muscular and radiant as the men. And I remember thinking like, that's something that I kind of clocked in my head is different from like all the other messaging that I got in the world.
So then, following your look at form, Bonnie, the next part of your book is about action, which is, I think, probably what we most associate with muscles. And as part of your reporting for that section of the book, you ended up doing something that sounded really fun, inspired by a woman named Ebony Ingram, I think. Could you tell us about what you did there?
So because jumping is such a foundational movement in human development, I wanted to write about jumping, and even Darwin had like so much to say about jumping for joy and how it kind of like is not just a demonstration of like your internal state of mind, but also like that actually movement brings joy, right? So he would talk about how like, all you have to do is like watch dogs, bounding along their owners, or like horses frisking, kids jumping, and he was just sort of like, this is what we do across species to express joy. And I was like, well, how can I watch this? How can I observe people, experiencing joy? And like double Dutch came to mind. So I spent a bunch of time in DC with this double Dutch team learning how to double Dutch. And it was so fun. Like people, you can't, one of the things that people love about photographers and artists, like they love about jumping, and Darwin said this too, it was sort of like you can't simultaneously control your facial muscles and your body and your jumping, and like your body gives you away. Like it tells you how you feel, and it tells everyone else who's watching you how you feel too, and you can't help but watch that and not feel joy. And one of the great examples I had also, not just with like double Dutch myself, but was with a guy named Dan O'Connor, who was the Great Lake jumper. So I don't know if any of you guys have ever seen this, but he's on social media, and during the pandemic, he started jumping into Lake Michigan every single day. So this was in June of 2020, and he kept jumping every day for a year. And like the AM talk radio guys were like, this guy is crazy. He can't jump through Chicago winter. And then he did. And then on the 365th jump, like a year after the great jump, Jeff Tweedy came and like sang his favorite song, "At the Edge of Lake Michigan, Spiders, Kids Smoking." There's a lyric that's like, on the private beach in Michigan, and he changed it to like on a public beach on Lake Michigan. And then like 150 people came and jumped in the lake with him because we were like all cooped up. And like, I just remember watching these videos, and thousands of people would have like watched them on like Twitter and Instagram, like because they were just like, I need to 10 seconds of this clip of this crazy guy. And he's like just like jumping. He's doing like a flip, or he's doing like a sailor dive or whatever. He's doing a can opener. And on the one hand, it's like so simple and dumb. And yet that is why it's so joyful, because you're just watching someone do something to like elevate his mood. Because like, we were all so depressed. And he was like, I need something to like break out of this funk. And so he's now jumped, I don't know, thousands of jumps. He still does it. And so, some days you'll be there and he'll be jumping with a bunch of people. Other days he's just like, he'll just set up his video. He's like, I'm like a 55-year-old guy with like, I'm terrible on social media and I have terrible camera angles, but I do it because it still feels good. And he's like, I don't know if I'll keep doing it, but as long as it brings people joy, and people will show up to jump with him. Yeah. Like they know he's there in the mornings, like jumping into Lake Michigan.
That's wonderful. There's so many amazing stories in your book, Bonnie, and one that I really enjoyed and found very moving was the story of a man named Matthew Sanford, which was in the section of your book that's about flexibility. So I wonder if you could tell us about him.
So Matthew Sanford is another really wonderful guy who I spent time with in the book. And so one of the things that was really important to me was to talk about muscle and what it means in the lives of people who might not like stereotypically be thought of as associated with muscle, right? Or that muscle figures so much into their lives. And so I was thinking about yoga, and I found out about Matt Sanford, who is a pioneer in adaptive yoga for bodies, or all kinds of bodies, but especially for disabled bodies who have that have been impacted by injury or illness. And so when he was 13, he was in a terrible car accident and was paralyzed from the chest down. And he remembers very vividly, he played basketball as a middle schooler. He just was a very embodied person and felt like everything, he talks about now, even at, he's in his 50s, and he talks about how he can still feel the jump shot. And even when he's in his wheelchair, he understands the unity of this motion, where you it's from your feet up through the crown of your head and then the edge of your fingertips. And he wanted that feeling. He wanted to still be able to have that feeling and to teach other people how to do that through yoga. And what that really, I wanted to know what that meant. And he told me, he's like, it's about feeling integrated in your body. And he remembers that, again, when he was in rehab in the hospital, they were like, forget about your paralyzed body. Pay attention to your not paralyzed body, strengthen all the muscles here, upper body, and carry on. And he was kind of like, okay, but that feels wrong to kind of forget. Because this is my whole body. And so what do I do about my paralyzed body? And so he would also think about how sometimes when he was sitting in a certain way, it's not that he had a miraculous healing in the nerves of his legs or in his spine or anything like that, where he could feel again. But he said if he was aligned in a particular way, he, sit bones up, feet on the ground, head aligned in his spine, he was just I felt a hum. He was I felt like things were right in my body. And I think we all kind of, if we think about that, we can all understand, you sit up straight, you just feel more alert. And so that was one of the things he was just sort of all of us feel that way, even me, even with, bodies with muscle. And we don't control all of our muscles. None of us do, right, voluntarily. There are some muscles in which we don't have that control. And so we're all on this spectrum from ability to disability. And when he kind of talked about this, we're all moving along the span in our lifetime. And sometimes disability comes to us very suddenly, with an accident, or slowly, as with aging. If we're lucky enough to get to an old age, that we will be, losing some of the sense of our body, or it changes. We're all changing, and muscle is one of those things that can change with us. And that, I think, is one of the most wonderful things about muscle, is that it's one of the most adaptable tissues in the human body, and it kind of reminds us that we're all capable of change. So with yoga, he was, there were these poses he'd showed me where, you could lie on your back with your head against the wall, or your arm's length away from the wall, and reach back, and you have a sense of a modified handstand. It's telling your body that you're upside down, even though you're not. And it's the stretching and the ribs and the muscle and your arms, and you're looking back. This was remarkable. He had me do a handstand against the wall, like a traditional handstand, and then he had me do this handstand on the floor without ever going upside down. And he was just it's the same sensation with gravity, just telling you different things. But that benefit that you get from going upside down with the handstand is something that you can achieve on the ground. And it was just all of these really creative ways of positioning your body, understanding that it is all still of a piece, and that our muscles are doing things and having conversations with other parts of our body, including our brain, because muscle is an endocrine tissue. It's not just the muscle, it's not just the mechanical movement of your skeleton around. It is an endocrine tissue, which means that it is constantly releasing signaling molecules that travel around your body and talk to your brain and talk to your nervous, talk to your immune system. And so such that your muscular health is cognitive health, is cardiovascular health, is immune health. It's metabolism, it's sugar regulation, it's all of these things. And what we don't understand also is that in the nervous system, not just proprioception, the sense of your body in space, and kind of external receptors on your body, but interoception. So interoceptively, in your muscles, there are these sensory muscle spindles that tell you that when you're stretching your muscle to its limit, and it will instinctively make you stop if you're hyperextending your muscle, and that's to protect the muscle from tearing, the joints from injuring themselves. So all of these things, it's an instinctive response. Your muscles will contract to protect that muscle. And it's not that we consciously control it, but these are the little things that are happening in our body all the time with muscle that we, I guess we don't quite, I think most of us don't quite think of muscle as doing these things for us, but it is really like such a holistic, and this is why I think about like muscles are intelligent in their own way. They have their own intelligence. They have their own kind of memory, cellular memory, and these are things that are in the book. But I just came away with such an appreciation for this grander role that muscle plays in our bodies.
Yeah, and Bonnie, the last section of your book is about endurance, and you tell a very stirring story of a young man named, he's Koo Stevens, and his great-grandfather. Could you tell us about him and what he did? Yeah.
So the last section of the book, I wanted to kind of explore this idea of endurance, right? So we think about our bodies and like running, right? So like human body, our bodies are built to move. And so running is such a part of human history and also like who we are, right? And Koo Stevens, when I learned about him and when I met him, he was a teenager, he was in high school, and he grew up on the Yarrington Paiute Reservation in Nevada. Amazing runner. Like at one point he was the fastest cross-country runner, high school runner in the state of Nevada. And he was like a cross-country team of one. He didn't have like all the resources of a bigger high school. He had to kind of go to different places to train. And but like he had dreams of going to the University of Oregon, and he ended up making it, just like run like Prefontaine. And so it was like this tension between him wanting to achieve all of these things as a competitive runner, but also like in his native community, that running had a different role, right? And he was very attuned to that as well, like where running was medicine, running was community, and also running was a way in which his great-grandfather escaped the Indian boarding school that he was stolen away to. And I think a lot of people here are aware of these Indian boarding schools, that probably about 400 of them in North America, where, across the 20th century that kids were taken from their communities and brought to these schools to kind of like, basically, whitewash the culture out of them. And Koo's great-grandfather, Frank Quinn, was 8 years old when he was taken to one of these schools. And he ran home 50 miles across the desert in Nevada back to his reservation. And they came back and took him again, ran home again. And then the third time he escaped, they let him stay because they were just like, this kid is gonna, this is like an 8-year-old kid who just wants to go home and was able to do this. Can you imagine like just how harsh these conditions are? And it was something that his grandfather also, he lived to an old age as a very respected tribal elder in Yarrington, and never talked about his experiences. But everyone knew that it had happened, and running was a way of honoring that, and also the other kids who didn't make it home. You go to the Indian school, the Stewart Indian School in Carson City, there's a cemetery. All these kids who died at the school, little kids, and so when he was kind of when Koo was thinking about like, what can I do to kind of teach people about what happened, but also just to remember these people, right? And also, and he was like, what can I do? I can run, and so he organized this remembrance run, and he ran it 3 times, and all these people came from around the world, like runners, to run with him, and I was fortunate enough to run on the 3rd run, and so we ran 3 times because Frank Quinn ran 3 times, and Koo learned the story about his great-grandfather when he was 8, and he was like, winning all the fun runs like around town, and so it was kind of a way to. And I have to tell you, like, this was one of the most profound experiences that I'd ever had, was go on this run and like really witness the best of humanity. Where like at the end of each day running, people would run in 5-mile increments. And so we were up in the mountains, like that people then taught, and we waited for everyone to finish running that leg before we kept moving on. And so like no one got left behind, And at the end of that first day's 25 miles, we kind of sat under the stars and just talked about why we were there. And people had come to honor their relatives who had been in these Indian boarding schools and had been really traumatized by these events. Because, they lose their culture and language and the connection to their families. And it was just really a way to heal from that, to kind of, and I think this is like where the bodily stuff comes in. Running is a way to show care. Like, this is why we do charity runs. Marathons in which you're like, I am running for this cause. I'm running for, for my mom who had breast cancer, for, my friend who is like, suffering from MS. Like, just that we understand even now in this day and age, like that to physically endure and to like put your skin in the game, it means something. And so like it was a way to kind of put all of these things together, and have muscle helping you through to do this thing, to move you through the world. And this is like where muscle as its tangible thing, the thing that's moving your skeleton through the world, is doing its thing. And then the meaning of muscle beyond that is like all collapse into one. And to me, that was like just where it all came together, and where we understand like what we do for each other when we do these physical acts is to demonstrate care.
Now, Bonnie, I know you are a lifelong athlete, right? You've always been involved in using your body in sports. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how researching and writing and reporting this book changed your own relationship to, or your own understanding of muscles and how they work.
First and foremost, and most pragmatically, it taught me that everyone should be lifting weights. You're probably seeing this everywhere, which is like everyone should be strength training, every single one of us. And that it's the single most important exercise that you could be doing as you age. And that starts, I know that people here are young and students, but also that's age-related loss of muscle starts in your 30s. And continues through your life. And that like lifting weights, strength training, resistance training is like the single most important thing that you can do to kind of like resist that, push against that. Really, like that's how you kind of maintain, again, not just like the ability to move and do all the things that you want to do, but also all of that metabolic stuff, all of that whole health stuff, all of that cognitive health, all of that, immune health. Investment in your cardiovascular health is situated in your muscular health. Like that is all related. And so I think that's one thing I really came away from very, 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 very feeling very strongly about, and trying to kind of absorb that into my life as a regular practice. In addition to all the water-based sports that I love doing, swimming and surfing, I realized that I need to also bear my own body weight sometimes. But then also that, I mentioned earlier that muscle is so adaptable and it is so changeable, and that even if you start exercising in your 70s, that the capacity for change is there and your life will change. I mean, that's I've talked to so many people about this. I've talked to all the scientists and the researchers, and it is so inspiring to know that throughout your life, we're all changing, and that we can kind of meet that change and challenge with grace. You know, Matt Sanford kind of taught me that. It's like we're all capable of doing the things, you know, in a different way. Like we're all going to be different today than we were yesterday and tomorrow and 10 years from now and 20 years from now. And yet we all get to have and deserve the like joy that movement and muscle bring us.
Well, Bonnie, I want to thank you for sharing your fascinating work with us tonight, and also to invite everyone here to give Bonnie a hand, and then we'll have questions.
Thank you.
If you have a question, just raise your hand and I'll come around with the mic.
Hi, Bonnie. So I'll start by saying I'm not on steroids, not on PEDs, but I'm curious if you've done any research or read anything about that, because it does seem like they can be beneficial, if not like crazily abused, like they maybe were by weightlifters or power lifters in the 90s.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question?
Oh, sorry. I was wondering if you read anything about like steroids or PEDs, because it does seem like they're used more commonly now, like by non-competitive like power lifters.
Have you heard about the enhanced games? Does anyone here know about the enhanced games? How there's going to be a sporting competition where steroids are not only used, but they're encouraged to kind of push the limits of human performance. I'm not sure how I feel about it because I know that, you know, steroid use and certainly hormones like testosterone to boost human performance is something that has been used for many, many years, many decades, and with mixed results, right? I think that there are a lot of studies that kind of show that there are adverse effects as well on the human body. But also the interesting thing is, you know, a lot of attention is on testosterone for muscle growth and all of that. But did you know that estrogen is also really essential for muscle health and metabolic health and growth? I mean, it's like, it's not just, I think we have such a focus on like the visual, right? And the strength element. And like, we don't really focus on sort of I guess what I'm saying is it's such a complex question that I like could not begin to answer here, but I personally, I will be watching the enhanced games with a journalist's curiosity because I really do want to, because there are many athletes who are participating in it, and there was one swimmer who you probably read about recently too, who was just like, I really want, like this, I'm going into this now because I want to see what I'm capable of, right? So I think that's like an interesting, this is not what I would do, but people are interested in seeing what will happen. But I do think like that is generally not a formula that I recommend to most people.
Will you write about the enhanced games, do you think, Bonnie?
We'll see. That's a good, yeah, maybe.
Everything is copied.
I'm just curious what your muscle routine is.
Oh, my routine. Well, I just try to do some weight training 3 days a week. And that means lifting things that are hard. But lifting things that are hard for you only means that you only have to do like 8 to 10 repetitions of them, and then you're done. And I think that a lot of people are really scared of the weight room in the gym, and certainly there was a point in time in which I didn't feel like I knew enough to be doing this independently. And what I love is that pretty much every gym you go to will like have like a free personal training session. Someone will talk to you about what are your goals and what is it that you want to be doing, and makes that place not scary to you. And so I always am like, talk to a trainer and go with a buddy, because those are the two most reinforcing things for like a practice like that. And that's anything, right? That anything that you want to do. It makes it fun. It makes it, you know, community like oriented, and it's time you spend with your friend.
Thank you so much for the book talk.
Oh, thank you.
Regarding the metaphor of muscle, I'm curious to learn. I think writing is type of a muscle that you also develop when you're working on book-length projects, and I'm really curious to hear if you could talk about how was this process for you, like developing this muscle to write, and also the transition to share your personal narratives in writing. How did that kind of writer career transition happen for you? And that would be great to hear. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. Annie and I were having a really great conversation earlier about structuring a book like this, where I think for me as a writer and a journalist, I really love coming at topics from like all angles. And so I'm always like in the beginning of research, like just opening the aperture as wide as possible and like taking it all in and really just following my curiosity, like the things that I find most fascinating and the stories that I collect, I just hope and trust that those are the things that at the end will shake out being the stories that other people will find interesting. So, you know, stories about, you know, that the whale butt muscle is called a peduncle. Like I spent like 3 days writing this like paragraph about the whale butt because that's like probably the single most powerful burst maneuver in the animal kingdom is when a whale breaches. And that muscular activity is so expensive, right? But like whales jumping is, you know, scientists speculate like, why do they do that? It's because kind of keep teaching their calves how to, you know, dive for food and also to like boost their, you know, myoglobin and all that. And also like, and every single research study is like, and also they're having so much fun, you know, like not that you can get into the whale brain, but also like that. You know, we all see that, and I know you're all laughing because you're just like when you see the whale, everyone's like, oh, you know, like there's a like recognizes like, game recognizes game, like that is joyful and beautiful, and I think that was worth celebrating and writing about. And also now when I go surfing with my friends, we're just like, you know, we see whale breaches, we're like peduncle, peduncle, and that's like a joyful and delightful thing to know.
Hi, Bonnie. Just here. Thank you so much. Your book sounds really interesting. Your previous answer actually leads into my question, which is, I guess with other animals, is there much difference between human muscle and the muscles of other animals? And are they doing something more efficiently, or are we doing, you know, in terms of delivering oxygen or propulsion? I'd just be curious.
From the smallest flea to the biggest whale, muscle is what propels us through life. Like, it's crazy to think about, like on a scale perspective, that these muscle fibers exist in a pretty analogous way across the animal kingdom. Even like in, you know, one of the great stories I learned for this book was about the sea squirt. And so this neuroscientist named Daniel Wolpert, who maybe some of you know, I talked to him. He's a neuroscientist, but he talks about why we have brains. Why is it? What do we have brains for? And he has this wonderful talk in this story, which he tells about the humble sea squirt, which is like this very rudimentary little animal that swims around in the ocean, and in its juvenile state, it's swimming around and it's looking for a substrate to attach to. And once it does that, it liquefies and digests its own brain because it no longer needs to move. And so, you know, to me, he told me the story and I just like started laughing, and it turned on its head my understanding of like brain and muscle in the like evolutionary hierarchy, and also in our own bodies, like of organ systems, of like, we always think like the brain is so important, but what if the brain only existed to help us move better, you know? And so like actually muscle and movement is like so important to our lives as individuals, and then also as, you know, as species who are successful in the world.
Hi, Bonnie.
Hi.
Thank you so much for your talk. I can't wait to read your book. I had a question about ableism and thinking about, can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, I'm thinking about the conversation we've had here tonight in relation to differently abled bodies and ableism in general, and how as there's more of a push, especially in kind of like girl empowerment circles about weightlifting and even like powerlifting, I'm just wondering, like, even with comments that say our bodies are designed to move, how do we celebrate and think about muscles and building muscle, but also be cognizant of the fact that some people's bodies are not able to move in the ways that we would recognize as like productive or good movement. So just generally, I wanted to hear you reflect a little bit more about ableism in this conversation about muscles.
Thank you for that question. I think my time with Matt Sanford really taught me a lot about that, because he was like, you know, people don't think of me as someone for whom muscles are important, right? He's in a wheelchair, and that he doesn't value his muscles, doesn't value using his muscles. He talks about, this is how he talks about muscles in a way that really was so profound to me. He said, I use my muscles in service to the whole. I use my muscles in service to the whole. So we all have varying degrees of control over the muscles in our bodies. And as we talked about earlier, as I mentioned earlier, like none of us has complete control over all of the muscles in our body. So we're all starting from that same place. And then where that control over our voluntary, our skeletal muscles is like, it's moving on this continuum from ability to disability throughout our lives for all of us. And where you're situated is constantly moving. And so for me, that helped me to understand we're all on that. All of us are on that ride together. And then to kind of then hold grace for the times in your life when you are not able to do the things either that you used to be able to do or that you wish you were able to do. And to have the grace for the body you have right now and what it is capable of, and it is capable of so much. And again, to always remember that muscles exist and to use them in the service to the whole.
Hi, Bonnie. I got a question regarding, you mentioned the importance of estrogen in weight training. So what are your thoughts on when a woman is on a menstrual cycle and when the estrogen are low? Like, what should women do during that time period?
There's a lot of really good science coming out about that. Michelle Kang, who has invested so much in U.S. women's soccer. She has invested a lot of money into women's sports science, and that is specifically investigating and giving the dollars to research on women's bodies as athletes and understanding the requirements of a female body to participate in sport to the best of the potential. It may look different, and specifically with regards to the menstrual cycle, there's a lot of research being done on it. I think that there's not a ton out there that we can all use yet, but I know that there's a really great sports book. Actually, come talk to me afterwards. I have it where I think that you'll be really interested in reading it because it has to do with women's sports science specifically and around the questions that you asked much more eloquently and more of a deep dive than I can talk about here.
Hi.
Hi.
I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about the concept of muscle memory, which is obviously a huge part of just everyday life, eating, speaking, typing, but also huge in athletics such as gymnastics.
So I have a whole section on the book on muscle memory, not just about muscle memory as we sort of traditionally understand it as it doesn't exist in our muscles themselves, it's in the motor neurons, right? Patterns of movement refined over time, and then we kind of have to commit less of a cognitive load because these circuits have been established and smoothed out, and the motions reflect that. But there's also the new understanding of muscle memory, which is that our muscle cells have an epigenetic memory of past exercise, such that, with epigenetics, it's not that the genes themselves change, it's that certain genes are switched on and expressed more. And so like the more you exercise, the more these muscle building, muscle mass, these genes that are related to producing, proteins that would support muscle growth and efficient muscle growth and retention of muscle mass are expressed much more fully. And so the more you exercise, the more periods of time in which you have exercise, you challenge those muscles, the more robust that memory is to kind of come back, even after injury or illness, that you can bounce back. And I think a lot of athletes know this sort of anecdotally, like in the off season, kind of coming back is like, it's actually much faster than they might expect. And then with even periods of, like taking a break. Like I think it was kind of reassuring during COVID that when we couldn't move around that much, that we weren't really losing everything all at once. But then there's also the contrary, which is that over time, our muscles also have a memory of atrophy. So periods of illness and injury can affect how our muscles then respond to those periods of muscle wasting, and they will remember those also. And then there's a dampening of the muscle building expression. And so over the course of your life, these cells are kind of battling it out. These memories are kind of battling it out, but the more periods of new bouts of exercise, a renewed commitment to a routine, you can kind of counteract those negative memories. And I just find that so fascinating. And again, so inspiring from like just a profound like philosophy of life kind of thing that helps me to like get up and go to the gym this morning before I came to you in my hotel, because I thought that was like, I was gonna feel better today, and I do.
We have time for one more.
Thank you very much for your time and everything that you shared. It was beautiful. I especially loved the part where you were discussing about your father. And you said specifically, during your upbringing, he made you feel capable, or what you guys did together made you feel capable. And you mentioned like the roundhouse kick and these specific things, or the flexing. And only you can answer this, but during your early experience with movement, I would have imagined, based on your description, it's more of like you're an artist, you're a student, you're kind of one with movement. And now, along your journey, you're like this movement scientist almost, where it's swimming, navigating muscle, all of that. And what you said, and I'll get to the main thing, what you said was, muscle is good, everyone should work out. Because we need more muscle, we need better bone density, etc. So my question based on that backdrop is it muscle and bone and tissue? Or is it the movement and that young girl that moved with her dad and did the roundhouse kick and being lost in the movement, the driver of the benefits of the tissue? Based on your experience, because you've spoken to a lot of incredible people.
Yeah, I love that question. It's so metaphysical. I mean, I think I am really driven, I am driven by that memory, right? It is so important to have the attachment of like what movement means to me is that I'm moving in concert with my dad. I don't see my dad very much anymore. He lives around the world, halfway around the world. And so when I do feel that the movements, even when I'm doing like push-ups, even when I'm going swimming or whatever, like I am practicing something that he first taught me, and I feel closer to him. And in fact, in writing this book, it was like this kind of, I started writing it in COVID, like 2021. I didn't know when I was gonna see him again. And it was, I think, the practice and like thinking about these things and talking about, it's like a palimpsest of like all of these different movement experiences for me. So I think that physically moving makes me feel closer to my dad. So it's all of those things. Thank you.